plan on being a short and sweet episode, and that's because the book I'm reviewing is short and sweet, no bigger than the size of my hand. We've got Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, and I want to say this is how you do a book cover. You've got the blood-tipped dagger, the ornate hilt, trying to get it on camera there. The green, the red, look at this font. The colors all go together so well. I'm trying to get it without the glare. And so funny enough, I picked this up at the thrift store for $2, I think. $2 because I thought it'd be a good piece of decor hanging up like this, maybe on the end of a bookshelf, you could see it. And I ended up reading it, and it turned out to be the first Shakespeare that I not only comprehended, but also enjoyed without the heavy use of spark notes or some other type of plot summary tool. And so I want to do this episode less of a detailed plot review, and that's on one hand because doing a detailed plot review of a barely 100-page book would leave you with not much to read, but also as a PSA because I do think there's a lot of people out there like myself who are beginners with Shakespeare or even totally unfamiliar with Shakespeare. I personally read, in high school, I read A Midsummer Night's Dream. In undergrad, I think I read Hamlet, neither of which I particularly enjoy, and that's mostly because I didn't understand the style of reading, You're used to reading these more modern American works, and then you read this Shakespeare. It's written 400 or 500 years ago with that archaic Shakespearean vocabulary, and it's totally lost on you. So I think this is a great place to start, Julius Caesar, for a couple reasons. One being, like I said, it's short, and when you're getting acquainted to these new styles of writing, these new manners of writing, you don't really want to go, in my opinion, you don't really want to jump headfirst into the deep pool. If you just want to read a Russian author, you don't really start with, War and Peace by Tolstoy. It's just too much all at once. So I think the shorter is better when you're just getting acquainted with this kind of stuff. Another reason being, like I said before, Shakespeare is famous for that archaic vocabulary and that Shakespearean vocabulary, which is part of his brilliance. Not only that he had a mastery of the English language, but he was inventive with the invented words as he was writing. And so a lot of that is lost to us because it's written hundreds of years ago, and even the words we do recognize are sometimes used in different ways or in different contexts. But in this book, there's not a whole lot of that. There's not a whole lot of Shakespearean vocabulary. At the same time, there's a little bit of it. So when you're reading Shakespeare, you do want to get some of that Shakespearean vocabulary because it's part of what makes him so unique, it's so brilliant. So it's a good introduction to that kind of writing, and you start to see when he would use those type of words, why he would use those type of words, and why it's so fun to read that he did that. But it's not every third word like it is in some Shakespeare books. And for what it's worth, a lot of these newer published Shakespeare plays, they do have the footnotes at the bottom of the page, maybe on the side of the page. So if you do come across some parts where you're totally lost, it usually helps you through the words if you're unfamiliar with them, or even if there is some type of historical or political allusions that we're not privy to. It helps you understand that kind of stuff. The third reason why I think this is a good introduction to Shakespeare is that it's just a fun read, especially if you're into history. I'm not exactly a history buff myself, but I do enjoy reading about history, particularly Roman history. This is one of 4 works, I think, by Shakespeare on Roman history. And I think a lot of people, if you're into reading stuff like Shakespeare, you're also probably into history, at least to some degree. So I thought it was a fun read. It's not super dense, like I said, so a lot of it you can read pretty easily. I read this in, I think, 2 sittings, may have even been 1 sitting. But I got through it pretty quickly, and that's because it was fun to read. There's stuff going on, the interactions between the characters, there's some great speeches in it that's very entertaining. And it is based, of course, on the nonfiction historical account of the Roman politician and general Julius Caesar. But funny enough, the book doesn't really feature him prominently as a character, and I don't think it's a spoiler alert to say that he's assassinated in the first third, maybe even first quarter of the book. So he's not really a prominent character, and when he is still alive in the book, he doesn't have that many lines. So the book is less about Julius Caesar as a character or more about him as an idea. He is the symbolic Roman transition from the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire, and the consolidation of power from the elected body of senators to one man. And he's, of course, still guided by the senators in some respects, but it's, the symbolic transition of power. And the book is more about the jockeying for power after Caesar is dead. This is, of course, a historical trend. You have characters like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, who are these symbolic figures of power. But what happens after they die, even if they were great men and did good things, which, a lot of them, you could argue, did not. There's this, jockeying for power after they die, which can lead to the dissolution of empires. And that's what this book is about on the surface. It's about, do they want to be governed by an emperor, or do they want to be governed by a republic? The republic is represented by 2 characters in this play, namely Brutus and Cassius. The empire is represented by two characters, namely Octavius and Antony. But if you dig a little bit deeper, of course, it's not all about that. It's about why would Brutus and Cassius be in favor of the Republic? And I think ego is a big theme here. Brutus and Cassius, although they're fighting for the same cause, are two very different people fighting for two very different reasons. Cassius is kind of this Machiavellian, politically savvy guy who sees Julius Caesar and the heir to the throne of Julius Caesar and the empire itself as a direct threat to his power and in turn his money. And he's kind of fighting for the Republic out of selfish reasons. He doesn't want to lose his power as a senator. And he, in some ways, doesn't really have as much respect for Julius Caesar as his peer and companion Brutus does. Brutus, although he is anti-empire and pro-republic, is doing it out of more selfless reasons. He has this great, appreciation of the transcendent idea of Rome, which is a mashup of strength and gravitas and glory and anti-tyranny. At the beginning of Roman history, they, of course, overthrew the tyrannical kings and established the republic, and that lived for hundreds of years. And so Brutus wants to keep that going, keep that idea alive. And so I think Shakespeare does a good job arguing for both sides and also giving us a good insight into the human character of these political battles. I think a lot of times we get too tied up in the abstract ideas, especially in politics, about the republic versus the empire. But at the base of this, the people fighting for these causes are at the end of the day still human beings with their own reasons for doing these, whether it's egotistical or not. So I think ego is a big theme. I also think there's a big theme in this play about fate versus free will, this timeless question of how much of our lives can we chalk up to fate and how much can we chalk up to free will, how much can we affect our own lives. And there's this great passage, this is the only one I wanted to share, and it's from the beginning of the play when Cassius is trying to convince Brutus to get completely on board with assassinating Caesar. And Cassius says, he's talking about Julius Caesar himself here. Cassius says, "Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." I thought that was important to share because we see Cassius's jealousy for Caesar coming through, which is like I was saying, his ego is kind of shining through. He's jealous that Caesar, even though they were once companions, comrades in battle, that Caesar gets all this credit and he's ascended to power where he himself is a measly senator. But you also see, he's talking about fate versus free will. He was saying the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. He's kind of a free will type guy. He thinks that if they take matters to their own hands and assassinate Julius Caesar, they can single-handedly revive the Republic. And as far as writing goes, like I said, most of it's kind of prosaic, but there are these great speeches, particularly after Caesar dies. His longtime friend and political ally, Antony, gives a speech at his funeral. I thought that was brilliant writing at the end. And these two sides that I mentioned kind of battle it out. Some people are killed, I'm not going to say who, but there's some great speeches at the end which are lamenting some characters and glorifying some other characters. And that's, in my opinion, was my favorite part of the book. It also serves to remind us that this is a play. These things were intended to be plays. And it's easy to get lost in that fact when you're reading it. You kind of just get absorbed into it. But these great speeches, you just can kind of see the actors up on stage giving the speeches that make me want to go to a play and get more into theater. I personally like theater, so I think these plays like this, and I was reading Oscar Wilde's plays too, they appeal to me just because for some reason I like theater. I like the visuals in my head of reading this, and I can see the actors up on stage. So yeah, if this sounds at all interesting to you, I would totally recommend this book. And I will say, this is the Books and Booze Book Reviews YouTube channel, and so I wanted to pair this with a red wine. I have read this, I immediately went to Food Lion looking for a red wine just because I thought the red wine would symbolize Julius Caesar's blood spilled for one cause. And I found something. This is 2 episodes in a row. I've just struck gold. I hit the jackpot, like, strokes of genius on this channel. So if you're familiar at all with the story, even if you haven't read this play, you might have heard about the soothsayer. He warned Julius Caesar. He said, "Beware the Ides of March." In the beginning of this play, he does make an appearance amongst the hoi polloi of the Roman public. Rising above them all is the soothsayer, and he says, "Beware the Ides of March." He says it a couple times. And here we have ego coming into play again. Julius Caesar does not heed this warning, and on the 15th of March, he is assassinated because he decides to appear in public in front of the Senate. So I found this perfect. I'm not going to show you the image yet, but I found this perfect red wine prophecy. So I already struck gold. I found the red wine. It's a Cab Sav, California Cab Sav, and it is named Prophecy. I'm like, perfect. I could talk about, the prophecy of the soothsayer and how Julius Caesar denied it. But look at this. To take it further, this obviously is not Caesar himself, but it is some type of monarchical figure. He's got the Roman crimson sign of gravitas and glory, and he's got the crown representing the empire. I'm like, perfect. Not only that, if you look at the back, it is named the Emperor, Prophecy, the Emperor. So there's no wine that better represents this book, I think, than Prophecies, the Emperor. It's like $11 wine, and I thought it was amazing. It drank like a $30 wine, in my opinion. So if you do end up reading Shakespeare, if you do end up reading Julius Caesar, I recommend getting this Prophecy Cab Sav. Cheers to that. And I took a great picture of this. I posted on the Instagram, Books Plus Booze. It's in the YouTube bio. And I just felt very, look at me today. I got my jacket on. I've got my turtleneck on. I'm sophisticated. I'm reading Julius Caesar. I'm drinking wine. I do recommend drinking wine if you're reading Shakespeare. There's something, that just fits so perfectly about that. So that's Julius Caesar, my official PSA recommendation. If you're getting into Shakespeare, Julius Caesar's where it's at. I will say, if you have any suggestions, if there's a lot of Shakespeare readers out there, if there's any transitional pieces that you would recommend from this beginner Shakespeare work into something more Shakespeare, please leave a comment or message me or whatever you want to do. I would love to keep reading Shakespeare. That's one of my small goals in the near future and distant future, is to start working through Shakespeare stuff. Next episode, I actually just went and picked up my Nabokov book from the library, so I think I'm going to do Nabokov next. Thank you guys. A tune for your time.
Hush, little baby, honey, don't you cry. One of these mornings, you rise up singing. Honey, spread out your wings and take to the sky. Until that day, honey, hush up your crying, 'cause your mama and your pappy, honey, they're standing by.